Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Jaguar, the Cosmic Alchemist, joined by Odin. And today I'm going to talk about Game of Thrones and why it's important in 2020. So, pretty much everyone, at least here in the States, who happens to be watching this has seen Game of Thrones, or at least they know about Game of Thrones. So it was an entertaining, suspenseful, sometimes bloody, violent show, but it was well written and a lot of characters, a lot of twists, a lot of ins and outs. And so my whole point here is I don't want to talk about Game of Thrones as a form of entertainment, but I want to talk about it as kind of a teaching tool and what we can learn from it. So I think to understand with any form of media, whether it's, a novel, a comic book, a play, TV shows, movies, whatever, documentary, none of this is created just purely for entertainment. Most people think documentaries are informative and nonfiction books are informative, and anything that's fiction or, movies, TV shows is all entertainment. It's simply not true. Writers like to communicate their views about things to a mass audience, and not everyone chooses to do it through nonfiction or documentary. In numerous interviews, Steven Spielberg has even said, "I've never made a movie." He's Steven Spielberg, so I quote, "I've never made a movie to entertain people. I make movies to comment on issues and situations and topics that I think are important." So, it's basically a paraphrase, but it's in essence what he has told interviewers time and time again. So, what does Steven Spielberg make movies about? He makes movies about genetic experiments and genetic mutations and about alien contact, about contact with ETs. He makes movies about the forces of nature like Jaws, Star Wars. The list goes on and on of these ET, these seemingly fanciful topics, but someone like him knows things that most other people don't. He has access to information. He has access to powerful people. So he knows things about the world that are not widely known, and he likes to comment on these issues. So Game of Thrones is no exception, and no form of fiction is any exception. So Game of Thrones is really, it's sort of kind of an expose into human nature and how people work. So, you've noticed in Game of Thrones there's a lot of betrayal, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of intrigue. People do that. Powerful people do that in a very obvious way, kind of like they do in Game of Thrones. And, regular people, you and I, that go to work every day, we do things like that in very subtle ways and, more sneaky. And we like to think that, powerful people don't get up to the same petty behaviors we do, but they also do it just on a grander scale. And all of us have manipulated people at some point in our lives. There's no avoiding that. If you say you haven't, you're lying. There's no two ways about that. Some people do it more than others. Some people do it very, very extremely seldom. But it's a spectrum. So, what I want to focus on today with Game of Thrones, this is such a broad topic, are the people contending for the throne of the Seven Kingdoms. So, what you have all these different contenders for the throne that are seemingly different, but really they're much more in common than they'd like to think, than their characters would like to think. And they have much more in common. They're much more the same than any of their fans would like to think. Some people are Daenerys Targaryen fans, and some people, like Jon Snow. Well, Jon Snow's an exception, but some people like the Baratheons. Especially when Stannis Baratheon was, battling for the throne. Some people liked his brother Renly. Some people like Cersei. Some people like the High Sparrow, who was a total fake. We'll get into that, but the whole point is that these people who are contending for the throne were all egomaniacs, and I say Jon Snow's an exception because he never wanted it. So we're going to get into that. So what all these contenders for the throne had in common was that they were all egomaniacs. And really, the real important kernel of what they all have in common is that they all think that they know what's best for everyone else. They all think that they have the answers, their approach is the best, and it's going to be great for the world if they just get the throne and they get their way. They all had that in common. I don't care how good you think these people are. I don't care how much you like their motivations, blah, blah, blah. They're all egomaniacs that thought they knew better than everyone else what everyone else should be doing with themselves. That's what they have in common. I mentioned the High Sparrow. It's he was trying to challenge Cersei, and he was like, he came off as the ultimate progressive, because he wore really poor clothes and he slept in this simple room. He was basically a communist. He was like a totally diehard, actual believer communist, and he had all these communist followers, and he was going to basically take everyone down to one level. But he was just as self-righteous and really as nasty as Cersei was, because he wanted all the power. So Cersei took care of him, and I was grateful for that, because that's definitely too strong of a propagandistic message if the High Sparrow got to live and rule. So he was a minor contender. You had a bunch of minor contenders. You had the Baratheon brothers, who bought it pretty early. Renly and Stannis, egomaniacs, power hungry. No two ways about it. And then Robert Baratheon, he had his moment in the sun. And then you had Uncle Greyjoy. What was his name? Euron. Euron Greyjoy. He never had a great claim to the whole thing, but he thought he was going to be king. That was short-lived. So really, when it came down to it, the major contenders for the whole thing, the people who were really playing the Game of Thrones, were Cersei Lannister and you had Daenerys Targaryen. So very intentionally, no doubt. What's his name? So very intentionally, no doubt, George R.R. Martin set these two characters up as a left versus right kind of a thing. So you take Cersei Lannister. She's about as right wing can get, and really the definition of conservative, when you look it up in a dictionary, it's not people who are mean to colored people, or people who are mean to gay people, or people who are mean to Jewish people. A conservative is someone who wants to conserve the power of the leaders and the institutions that are in place. They don't want new institutions, and they don't want to knock down or bulldoze the old institutions. They want to keep things the way they are. That's conservative. So Cersei Lannister, the whole Lannister family, except for, Jaime and Tyrion, they're just kind of, they just sort of got along with whoever was in charge. But, Cersei and Tywin Lannister, Uncle Lannister, can't remember his name, but they were as conservative can get, because they wanted all the power. They wanted to keep it. They didn't want to budge. They didn't want to, throw anyone a bone, kind of share any of their power. And really, they looked down on people who, weren't at their level, weren't as elite as them or as powerful as them. And the important thing with Cersei Lannister and people like Tywin Lannister is they didn't hide who they were. They didn't smile and they didn't pretend that they liked the little guy, that they liked the underprivileged person. They were very plain and very open about who they are. And they were just like, they weren't giving the time of day to someone who wasn't on their level. So they weren't trying to win the nicest person in the room award. That was just not one of their motivations. So on the other side of the spectrum, set up as more of the left-wing person, more of the populist, was Daenerys Targaryen. Funny thing though, Daenerys is basically from a billionaire family. Her father was the Mad King who almost, set King's Landing on fire with all people in it, which she ends up doing, oddly enough. So Daenerys is she's a brat rich girl. You know what I mean? Granted, she was sent into exile, but she was raised as royalty. She was treated as royalty, and she was raised with delusions of grandeur about, her bloodline and her destiny and all this shit. And, especially once her brother was out of the picture, she definitely fed those delusions of grandeur that he was feeding to her about her and her family. So, that is Daenerys' background. So, tough background for a populist to come from, kind of, I don't buy it. So, Daenerys, heiress turned populist. She starts this whole thing, she's in Essos, the eastern part of the world across, the Narrow Sea, and she gets this multicultural following. She gets the Dothraki, who are kind of like, they're sort of like half Mongolian, half Afghani or Arab. They're kind of this like desert horse people, nomad kind of a thing going on. And she gets the Dothraki following. Then she frees the slaves, and then she gets on a moral high ground when she goes to free the slaves, but then she crucifies the owners. So, and that was really an act of revenge. It was a way of pandering to those people. Because once you seek revenge, you're no better than the people you sought the revenge from. You know what I mean? If you think someone's so horrible and evil, then you get the upper hand over them. And you basically do the same thing to them that they do to other people. You're no better than them. And this is something we see right now. A lot of special interest groups, they cross the line of advocating for their group that they advocate for and that they identify with, and they go into revenge. And we see this all over. We see it in the women's movement. Some of the leaders cross that line into revenge, and it becomes like, it goes from like a movement for equality to a movement for revenge. And we see this. We see this with colored people. With the leaders of the movement. Sometimes they cross the line. It becomes a revenge thing, and you see this with white guys too. You find white guys who feel all put upon because other people want equality, and they want to advance things out of the way they were, before the civil rights movement, and they cross the line, into revenge. So it's like we have all these like sort of populist revenge movements going on, in the U.S. today, and in the Western world in general. So anyway, Daenerys Targaryen, she totally gets into the populist revenge kind of thing. She totally crosses the line. So then she takes on the Unsullied, and they're people of color as well. So she has all these groups of people of color who are supporting her and who are behind her and who are following her. So Daenerys Targaryen definitely wins the diversity award. She's like white blonde, but still, she's got the following, and in her cabinet, her right hand woman's black, so she definitely gets the diversity award for Game of Thrones because she has all these different groups, all these people from different groups and origins in her retinue. So to a lot of people, Daenerys, just like the High Sparrow, she looked like the answer to everything, because it's like, oh, well, she's a woman, and she, a woman can't be as nasty as a man, or as vindictive or sadistic or as evil as a man. That's completely impossible. Even though she's still human, but riddle me that one. So, every horrible man is raised by a woman or is married to a woman. So it's like, men and women are, if you think men and women are equal in every way, women can also be as nasty as men. It's just a fact. So, a lot of people thought Daenerys was the answer because she was a woman and she embraces diversity and, So an important thing to realize about Daenerys Targaryen is that she's not out to help the impoverished and the underprivileged and the discriminated people of the Game of Thrones universe. Her whole motivation is to get the power. And those underprivileged people, those people of color, the slaves, whoever she's helping, she's using them to get the power. All those people are stepping stones on Daenerys' way to power. Her whole thing from the beginning was to get the Iron Throne because she felt entitled to it, because her father was the Mad King who was overthrown, who was killed by Jaime Lannister's bodyguard because, again, he was going to burn the entire city with everyone in it rather than let someone else rule it. So Daenerys and her brother, they started out just wanting the power because they felt entitled to it. So an heir and an heiress, that's all they are. The approach they decided to use was they decided to get all the underprivileged people on their side because they didn't have alliances from all the wealthy and powerful people in the Game of Thrones world. So that's the reason that they chose to help these people. It wasn't because, it wasn't because they were nice people and they wanted to help them out. That was the only way they could get the power. So a lot of our, in the extremes, our extreme left wing, our populist leaders, they just want to help people so that they can get the power because they think they know what's best for everyone else, and they think that them being in charge is the answer for the world. So it's no different here. It's absolutely no different. And Elizabeth Warren, or Bernie Sanders, Mayor Pete, doesn't matter. It's the same thing. They don't have the connections with wealthy and powerful and influential people. So they take the other route. They use underprivileged people and people who've been discriminated against as their means to an end, as their stepping stone. And it's interesting because at the end, Daenerys comes right back to who she was in the beginning, just this brat who wants to rule everyone because she thinks she knows what's best. But to get there, to get all these people behind her, she had to talk a big game and put on a big smile. Now Cersei, on the other hand, never talked like she was everyone's friend and she wanted to help everyone. She was honest from day one that she just felt entitled to rule and everybody better get the hell out of her way. Now Cersei is no better. One is not better than the other. The only difference is that one is very upfront, Cersei, or the right wing, about how they do things, and then the left, like Daenerys Targaryen, is more deceitful, and they put on a nice smile. It's like a fox catching a lamb. Puts on a nice smile where a wolf is just growling and scary and nasty. That's the only difference. So I don't see a difference, and that's one thing that the show is communicating. A very important thing that the show is communicating. So it seemed like a pretty clear-cut thing for a lot of people. But, Daenerys was no less violent or sadistic or vengeful or power-hungry, and she was no less of an egomaniac than Cersei Lannister or Robert Baratheon or, whoever the hell you want, really, Tywin Lannister. She just had a nice smile. She had a nice smile, and she made a lot of promises to underprivileged people. That's the only difference. She waged war. She burned a whole city full of people. When the city had already fallen, they destroyed the defenses. They destroyed the big giant crossbows to shoot down the dragons. The bells were ringing, the city had fallen, and she still burned a whole city full of people. Basically, she wanted to make way for her people, the people she was leading. You know, that really, she definitely got into a bloodlust, but I think that was part of it. She wanted to exterminate those people so her people would have a place to live without having to share it or fight for it. So, Daenerys became the monster that she set out to destroy and set out to overthrow. She did the exact same thing that her father, the Mad King, almost did till Jaime Lannister stabbed him in the back. He was going to set the whole city on fire because down in the tunnels underneath the city, they had a bunch of that, not Greek fire, but the dragon fire, basically the napalm stuff that was, highly explosive that they used in the Battle of the Blackwater against Stannis Baratheon's fleet. So, Daenerys became the monster that she set out to seek revenge against. And that's what happens when you take revenge. You become the monster that you're seeking to destroy. That's just the way that works. It's always been that way all throughout history. It's just how we work as humans. You go out for revenge, you start acting like the person you're fighting. You become them, and then someone's going to take you down. And that happened. And, so Jon Snow, he understood what a monster that Daenerys had become, and he did the right thing. He did one of the greatest public services in that whole show, is he ridded the world of her, because she was a complete monster. She was standing in a city of ashes, and she was still glorifying her own ego and just telling herself how great she was and how great the future was going to be, even though she was ruling a pile of ashes. And she still had a whole other war to fight. She was just going to keep going north and subduing all of the different kingdoms on the way there. So, she was a monster, and this really, Daenerys does a lot to bust the whole myth that the extreme left is any better than the extreme right. Extremes are equally terrible, because the Soviet Union was extreme left, and Communist China was extreme left, and even Nazi Germany was extreme left, and that's a thing that people don't quite understand. But the Nazi Party was the National Socialist Party. Just because you're socialist doesn't mean that you're a nice person. The definition of socialist is not someone who likes gay people and who likes colored people and embraces diversity. Socialism is just about micromanaging everything and planning everyone's life for them. So, extreme left is no better than extreme right. Radical left is no better than radical right. That's a complete myth. So, what you want is the middle path. And none of these people did that. And really, everyone who survived Game of Thrones was, middle path. Buddha talked about that. That's a Buddhist thing, the middle path, and that, and that's that's every spiritual tradition. In every energy system, and the Taoist, the Taoist acupuncture meridian system. You have a central channel that goes down your stem line. It starts at the top of your head and it goes down through the center of your body to your perineum. So, and that's your central channel, and that's sort of looked at as where the energy of your soul lives, and it's in the middle between the left and the right of your body. Funny how that works. So, real spiritual progress and high consciousness is all about staying in the middle, and part of that is staying in the present moment, because going to either left or right, going to the extremes, is all about fear. Right-wingers fear the future, left-wingers feel the past. The right is always trying to go back to some ideal past, and the left is always trying to run away from the past and go to some ideal future, whereas the right wing resists the future. So, you have to stay in the present moment, otherwise you become the monster that you think you're fighting. You know, and really the thing is at the end of the day, there are no monsters. You just have people motivated by fear who think that they know what's best for everyone else. That's the whole point of this video. And that leads me into another point. 2020, we're in an election year here in the United States. And so what you have is you have a contest between egomaniacs who think they know what's best for everyone else. And I don't care how much you like these people, I don't care what the excuses are for how much you like these people, they all think they know what's better for everyone else. That's just the reality of it. They just have different approaches. You know, and with this whole right versus left thing, you have, there's a great quote, and actually I'll play the video, but you know, Malcolm X is, he's on a talk show being interviewed, and you know, Malcolm X says, you know, the right wing, they're like wolves, and the left wing are like foxes. So, and he said the only difference between a wolf and a fox is that a fox smiles. But both a wolf and a fox eat lamb. So because the fox smiles, it can get close to those lambs, and the lambs let their guards down. And the minute they let their guards down, the fox swoops in, bites their throat, and he's eating lamb for dinner. Whereas the wolf has a much harder time to get a hold of a lamb because the lamb knows to be afraid and runs away. So that's the difference between left and right. The right they don't pretend to be the friend of the little guy and to be a friend of underprivileged people. The left does. But they're still power-hungry elitists, basically. You know, they're Daenerys Targaryens. And, you know, what's the difference between a Daenerys Targaryen and a Cersei Lannister? Not a whole hell of a lot. It's just the smile and the empty promises.
But being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
And I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
So, that's what we have. That's what we have in 2020. So, you know, a lot of people don't want to hear this, but we have a Game of Thrones going on right now, and it's going to be a bloodbath before we get to the primaries, because, you know, already you have basically at the end of the Democratic debates that just went down, that just happened, that were just held, Elizabeth Warren snubbed Bernie Sanders' handshake, all on hearsay. So there's this hearsay out there that Bernie Sanders said a woman couldn't win in 2020. So Elizabeth Warren, being the opportunistic egomaniac that she is, and I'm not saying Donald Trump's not an egomaniac, I'm not saying the Republicans are not egomaniacs, I'm not saying Bernie's not an egomaniac, I'm not saying Mayor Pete's not an egomaniac, I'm not saying because all these people are. If you seek the office of the president, you're an egomaniac. That's just the fact. So, being the opportunistic egomaniac that Elizabeth Warren is, she uses hearsay about Bernie Sanders to pander to women, and she decided to snub him at the debates when he reached his hand out to shake hers. So, you know, that was definitely mean-spirited, and it was total pandering, and it was a total publicity stunt. So, you see her spirit, you know, and it doesn't matter how much you think a woman should be president. You know, that was definitely That's a mean-spirited thing to do. And you know, it's interesting. I saw Elizabeth Warren speak at my dad's graduation a couple of years ago, and it was the most egocentric thing I'd ever seen. It was like the graduating class wasn't there, and it was a campaign pitch because she knew she was gonna, you know, run for president. So it was pretty sad to watch. It was basically, you know, you could see the little girl in her that didn't get enough attention when she was a child. And, you know, you could just see someone who is extremely hungry for attention and just can't get enough of it. So, the whole point is none of these people are really any different from any of them. But the whole country is going to fight about it. So, this whole primary season, before, you know, the Democratic Party picks a nominee, it's going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be a complete shit show, and it's going to be very ugly, and everyone's going to be throwing everyone under the bus. And really, I think this is going to precipitate the breakup and a collapse of the Democratic Party. I think in 2021, 2022, you're going to see a collapse of the party. Something's going to take its place. Another party will take its place. That and you know, the people who support the Democratic Party will become members of that party. I hope more parties come in. I think it would be pretty cool if we had 5, 6, 7 parties. It would really you know, break up the dualism. And I do see that in the future. I think the Republican Party will fall at some point in the future, you know. So not only are the Democratic candidates going to just destroy each other and, you know, smear each other, but the two parties are going to destroy each other too. But I predict that the Democratic Party will fall first. And once you get to the general election, it's gonna be just as ugly. And and Donald Trump's no angel. You know, he has his issues, but whoever the Democratic nominee is going to be, whether it's going to be Warren or Biden, because you know, they've already rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders, and they're going to rig it again. And you know, and CNN is helping to rig that primary again. They were doing it in the debate when Elizabeth Warren gets all the easy questions and Bernie gets the hard ones. But you know, Elizabeth Warren has made a deal with Wall Street. Look up ESGs, environmental, social, and governance. It's basically a program that investment banks have rolled out. So basically, people can invest. They can give money to investment banks, which they will then lend to governments for things that they can't afford. So environmental and social and governance programs. So Wall Street was all freaked out about Elizabeth Warren, and then a few months ago, the financial news started running articles about, well, you know, Elizabeth Warren's not so bad for Wall Street after all. So she's made a deal. You know, and she's made, you know, $700,000 a year for, you know, teaching once a week at Harvard. So she's part of the whole student loan problem. So, you know, don't buy her bullshit that she's going to fix that. So anyway, whether it's Biden or Warren that's the nominee, they're going to show their true colors as they run against Donald Trump. And, you know, like I said, he definitely has ego issues. But the point is that Democrat is going to get really ugly trying to unseat him. And they're going to embarrass themselves, you know, and that debate was already an embarrassment. But the embarrassments are going to keep coming. And it's going to, Democrats who support these different candidates, whether it's Biden or Warren or Sanders, they're going to start fighting each other, getting really nasty with each other. And, you know, and then once the general election comes, and the run up to that, whoever that Democratic nominee is going to make themselves look horrible, and really embarrass themselves, you know. And honestly, you know, Donald Trump has a way of embarrassing himself. I mean, you have to admit it, but you know, he's not a monster. He is who he is. You know, I think he's kind of a Robert Baratheon, really. He's definitely not Cersei Lannister. He's kind of like you know, he's a blue collar billionaire. You know, he's kind of like He's like Robert Baratheon, you know. You know, he likes his ladies, and, you know, Baratheon liked to drink. Trump doesn't, but, you know, he doesn't have that Ivy League polish to him. You know, he's more like a regular person, and, you know, regular people relate to him. That's why so many voted for him. You know, I don't care how much you hate him. You have to admit that. That's why so many people voted for him. So, you know, he's a Robert Baratheon. So the whole point is we have this Game of Thrones going on, and by the end of it, you're going to see that everyone is on equal footing. No one is, you know, really any better than anyone else. I'd rather see Mr. Trump in the White House than Hillary Clinton. She's definitely a Cersei Lannister. She signed a lot of death warrants over the years. And, you know, and the thing I don't like about Elizabeth Warren is the smile. She's fooling people with a smile. She's not as nice or altruistic as you want. She wants people to think she is. You know, if she becomes president and she gets into her whole wealth redistribution thing, she's not going to let anyone touch her $12 million in assets. You know, nobody that, but everyone else's money is going to be up for grabs. So, this is all a Game of Thrones. It's all a big show. You know, it looks like these people are enemies on TV, but they're friends when the cameras turn off, and they just know that this is a big play acting thing they have to do, because it makes the people feel important. And it, you know, we've all been raised to be narcissists. You know, Republican, Democrat, whatever, atheist, Christian, it doesn't matter. You know, in the years after World War II, we've all been raised to be narcissists. So this whole political show boosts our narcissism, and it makes us feel important. You know, like we're picking the person, and it makes it. And we've lied to ourselves, and we've told ourselves that we know who these people are, but all we're doing is fighting over a television show. It's no different than if you were fighting over the outcome of Game of Thrones. So, look forward to the Game of Thrones this year. So my last point I want to get into is about this middle path I was talking about. So, when you look at the people who survived, who made it to the end, they were mostly people who didn't want any power. You know, Sansa Stark wanted some power, but, you know, she didn't want to take anything from anyone that wasn't already hers. You know, Winterfell was her home, and, you know, the North was her father's estate, so that was due to her. But, you know, when you talk about people like Tyrion Lannister, Sir Davos, the Onion Knight, Jon Snow, and Sam Tarly, and especially, above them all, you have Bran Stark. Those people didn't want the power for themselves. They just wanted to support someone who could bring the world back into balance and to, you know, make the world better. Tyrion made a lot of bad choices, but, you know, he was coming from the right place in his heart. He wanted to support a good person who could do good things, and, you know, he made bad choice after bad choice, and he realized that backing Daenerys was the wrong thing to do, but it was too late. You know, he realized it when she burned Lord Varys for telling people about Jon Snow. You know, and Jon Snow was he was Aegon Targaryen. He was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, Daenerys' brother. So, you know, Jon Snow was the heir of the most senior male Targaryen. So, but even though Jon Snow had this you know, foolproof claim to the throne, he didn't want it because he wasn't a power monger like Daenerys was, and like everyone else who was competing for the throne was. He just wanted to live his life. He just wanted to be an honorable man. So, Jon Snow didn't want that throne. And, the person that I really want to highlight in this, though, is Bran Stark. Bran Stark never wanted any of it. He got chased out of his home when Theon Greyjoy, came from the Iron Islands and started raiding the place, and he had to leave, and he went north. He in his visions he knew he had to go north of the Wall, and eventually he found the Three-Eyed Raven, played by Max von Sydow, and he found the Children of the Forest, and basically he learned that he had to become the new Three-Eyed Raven. So Bran Stark went through a death and a rebirth, after he fell off the tower when Jaime Lannister pushed him and he lost the use of his legs. He had to become a whole new person. He was never going to, become a knight and a warrior and, a lord like his father. He had to be someone different. And then, when he went for his training with the old Three-Eyed Raven, he basically activated all of his his extra senses, and his intuition, and really powerful intuition. So he went through a complete death and rebirth, and basically he created that spiritual emptiness within himself, so that the power of the soul and the spirit and intuition could fill that emptiness and work through him. So Bran Stark becomes the new king of the Six Kingdoms. Even though he doesn't want it, but he's recognized for his lack of ambition, his lack of desire to gain the throne, and he's someone who's transcended ambition and desire and power hunger and the desire for wealth, and he's a highly spiritual being, and he just wants he has the wisdom to lead the world into a balanced place, into a state of equilibrium. And they know this, so that's why they choose Bran Stark, Bran the Broken. So, it's he as the Three-Eyed Raven had the wisdom to lead that part of the world, to lead that kingdom. So that's the whole, that's one of the things you see here in this show, is that, the people who made it through were the ones who could walk that middle path, and they could work with other people, and they could compromise, and they didn't have to have their little way all the time. So that's the big takeaway from Game of Thrones is, improving the world and having a good world is not about going to one of these extremes. It's about working with other people. It's about compromise, and it's about not lusting after power. If power comes to you, then you use it responsibly. And but the big thing is that you don't step on other people to gain power or to gain wealth or whatever the hell it is you want. So that's my take on all this. I thought it was a great series, and I love to look at the underlying themes in fiction. So in this universe, so we step out of the Game of Thrones universe. In this universe going forward, we need to look for the Bran Starks of the world, and the Tyrion Lannisters, and the Jon Snows, the Sam Tarleys, the Sir Davoses, Brienne of Tarth, honorable, noble people. And that's the thing in our world right now is, not only do we not have noble leaders, we don't even know what nobility is. People think a big false smile and a big degree from an Ivy League university and a big military credential and a big loud mouth makes someone a leader. And that's the thing is, the right wing loves a tough guy with a big military credential or a lot of money, because they like to see themselves as tough or successful or whatever. And then the left loves a victim. because they identify with victims, and they, you know, they love to tell the stories about how they've been victimized over and over. You know, and neither of these approaches are good, because one, you know, the left fears the past and runs frantically to the future, and the right fears the future and runs frantically towards the path. And they're both mindless. So really, the extremes, they're kind of like the White Walkers too. They just have this insatiable drive and hunger that they don't even know where it comes from. And they kind of destroy everything in their path, and they want to convert everyone who they come across, just like extreme left and extreme right want to do. You know, the White Walkers turned everyone that they came into contact with into a White Walker. So that's what the left and right are. They're basically fucking White Walkers. So again, we have to go to the middle. We have to, you know, cooperate, compromise, work with people. So, you know, the whole point here, like I said, we don't even know what nobility is. We think the big smile, or the tough guy, or the money, or the big mouth, someone who shines on television. That you know, that's who you're going to vote for, the person who you like on television, you know. Imagine if you could bring Bran Stark into this universe and put him on television. He'd be a boring television character. But, and that's the thing, is everyone who's in charge in our world today is a television character. It's a big reality show. You know, you can help elect these people, but you can't select these people. You can't tell your party, the Democratic or the Republican Party, who you want them to select as nominees. That's not within your power. You just get to vote for Coke or Pepsi or Bud or Bud Light. You know, it's not empowering, but we like to tell ourselves that, because we all have a certain degree of narcissism. So, this Game of Thrones is going to be revealed to us, because at the end of this month, at the end of January 27th, we have Saturn going into its home sign of Capricorn. Jupiter's going to go with it by the end of March. Pluto's going to be in there. You get Saturn and Pluto anywhere together, especially in Capricorn, you get a wake-up call. They wake you the hell up, and they bring your attention to reality and to what is actually going on. They don't let you sleep, and they don't let you dream and have delusions, you know. So that's going to happen. So Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, they're going to be driving the collapse of government and the collapse of, you know, really the stranglehold on the truth that academia and the media and the mainstream media have. So all these institutions are going to be crumbling and losing their monopoly on power in their respective fields. And then you get Jupiter in there for this grand conjunction, and with Saturn, and it's going to make it even stronger. You're going to have upheaval, and this upheaval is going to bring down, you know, the monopoly power that these institutions have, and new things are going to be able to take their place. And then, you know, Saturn and Ketu come back to Mula like they were in 2001. We're going to have a big, spectacular, tragic event, most likely, to get our attention. To get our attention and to get us mentally on board with this whole idea that these institutions are going to crumble and lose the power that they've traditionally had. So, stay tuned. Stay tuned, sports fans. It's going to be a hell of a year. And it's going to be a hell of a decade. So, if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, definitely check it out. And, you know, going forward, definitely look at works of fiction differently. You know, you can learn things without just getting your mind numbed by dry data. You know, storytelling is really a much better way of teaching things than just a data dump. Because the stories have a life of their own, and they go into your subconscious and into your unconscious mind, because stories are always archetypes. All the characters are archetypes, and archetypes they're basically they're sort of forces within our own minds, and they're parts that all of us play. It's from some time to another, so we can relate to them. And incidentally, political candidates are archetypes too, and some of us identify with, different archetypes more than others. So I'm going to keep this under an hour. But thanks a lot for tuning in. My website is thecosmicalchemist.com. If you want to see how these current events within astrology affect you specifically, and how they affect your individual birth chart, then I can help you with this. You can get a Vedic astrology reading from me, and we can sit down and really go over this stuff in depth. And it's a great way to kind of get a roadmap of your life and see what your hidden talents are and what your hidden pitfalls are, and how to play up to your natural strengths and how to work around your natural challenges and weaknesses. I also do rune readings. Rune readings make a great mind map. It shows you where you're blocked in your thinking and in your psychological and your emotional patterns, and what's stopping you from living the life that you really want to live. And I also have some Qigong videos on sale for download. Qigong's a great mind-body practice to just get you in touch with your deeper mind, your subconscious and your unconscious mind, and it helps you to work the kinks out of your psychological and emotional patterns. And it helps you to activate yourself and empower yourself spiritually. So thanks again for tuning in, and I'll join you soon later. Have a good one.